The stagecoach lurched to a violent halt, and Natalie Thorne knew immediately that her worst fears about traveling alone through the Oklahoma Territory in 1882 were about to come true. 3 men on horseback surrounded the coach, their faces hidden behind dirty bandanas, rifles pointed directly at the driver, who raised his hands without protest. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribcage as the door was yanked open, and a grizzled man with cold gray eyes gestured with his pistol for her to step down. "Out," he growled, his voice rough as gravel. Natalie gathered her skirts and climbed down on trembling legs, the June heat beating down on her shoulders. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago with everything she owned packed carefully in her trunk and carpetbag, headed for Muskogee, where her late aunt had left her a small boarding house. At 24, she had finally gained her independence, only to have it threatened by outlaws in the middle of nowhere. "Please," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I do not have much money." "We will be the judge of that, lady," another man said, hauling her trunk from the top of the coach. It hit the dusty ground with a thud that made her wince. Her carpetbag followed, and then they were rifling through everything, tossing her carefully folded dresses and undergarments into the dirt, pocketing her small jewelry box, the $20 she had saved, and worst of all, the leather journal that contained her aunt's recipes and the deed to the boarding house. "No, please, not that." Natalie stepped forward, reaching for the journal, but the gray-eyed man shoved her back. "Might be worth something," he said, stuffing it into his saddlebag along with everything else of value they could find. Within minutes, they had taken nearly everything that mattered, leaving only her ruined clothes scattered across the road. Then they rode off toward the west, whooping and firing their pistols into the air, leaving Natalie standing in the road with tears streaming down her face and the stagecoach driver looking apologetic but helpless. "I am sorry, miss," the driver said, climbing down to help her gather what remained. "Happens more than it should out here. We can report it when we reach Muskogee, but I would not hold your breath about getting anything back." Natalie nodded numbly, shoving her dusty clothes back into her trunk. The jewelry had been her mother's, the money was meant to help her get started, and the journal contained everything she needed to make the boarding house successful. Without it, she would be arriving in a strange town with almost nothing. They reached Muskogee 2 hours later, and the town was larger than she had expected, with proper wooden buildings lining the main street and people going about their business in the afternoon heat. The driver helped her carry her trunk to the sheriff's office, a sturdy building near the center of town, and there she found herself telling her story to a tired-looking lawman who wrote down the details with little enthusiasm. 3 men, you say, headed west. Sheriff Coleman scratched his gray beard. "That could be the Dalton gang, or it could be any number of others. We will keep an eye out, Miss Thorne, but I cannot promise much." Natalie left the sheriff's office feeling defeated. She asked for directions to her aunt's boarding house and made her way down a side street, pulling her trunk behind her with difficulty. The building, when she found it, was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and peeling white paint. It looked tired but sturdy, and despite everything, Natalie felt a small flicker of hope. She used the key her aunt's lawyer had sent and stepped inside to find the place dusty but intact. The furniture was covered in sheets, and the kitchen at the back looked like it had not been used in months. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning, trying not to think about everything she had lost, trying to figure out how she would make this work without any money or her aunt's recipes. By evening, she was exhausted and hungry, and she counted the coins she had left. Barely enough for a meal and some supplies. She was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun set and wondering what she was going to do, when she heard the sound of boots on the wooden walkway. A man was approaching, tall and lean, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He had dark hair that touched his collar and moved with the easy confidence of someone who spent most of his time on horseback. When he reached her porch, he stopped and tipped his hat, and she saw that he had striking blue eyes and a strong, weathered face that looked to be in his late 20s. "Excuse me, madam," he said, his voice deep and polite. "I am looking for Miss Natalie Thorne. Would that be you?" Natalie stood up quickly, smoothing her dusty skirts. "Yes, I am Natalie Thorne. Who are you?" "Name is Ryder Anderson, madam." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out her leather journal, holding it out to her. "I believe this belongs to you." Natalie stared at the journal, then at him, her mouth falling open. "How did you get that?" "I was tracking 3 men who robbed a bank over in Fort Smith last week," Ryder said. "Caught up with them about 15 miles west of here. They had quite a collection of stolen goods with them. When I brought them in to the sheriff, he mentioned a lady had been robbed on the stagecoach earlier today. I went through what they had taken and found this journal with your name written inside." Natalie took the journal with shaking hands, holding it against her chest like a treasure. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me." "I have got more," Ryder said, and he pulled out her small jewelry box and a cloth pouch that clinked with coins. "This was all marked as yours. The jewelry has your initials engraved on the back of the locket, and the sheriff confirmed the amount of money you reported." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "I cannot believe you found everything. I thought it was gone forever." "Well, it helps when the men doing the robbing are wanted criminals," Ryder said with a slight smile. "There is a reward for their capture, which is why I was tracking them in the first place. But I always try to return what belongs to folks when I can. You are a bounty hunter?" Natalie asked, studying him with new interest. "Yes, madam. Been doing it for about 5 years now." He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyway, I am glad I could return your things. The sheriff told me about your aunt passing and leaving you the boarding house." "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Natalie said softly. "I never met her, actually. She moved out here before I was born, but she was kind enough to remember me in her will. I am hoping to make a fresh start here." Ryder nodded, glancing at the boarding house behind her. "Looks like it needs some work, but it is a solid building. Your aunt ran a respectable place. You should do well once you get it fixed up." "I hope so," Natalie said, clutching her recovered belongings. "May I offer you something? Dinner, perhaps, as a thank you." "I do not have much prepared, but I could make something simple." Ryder started to shake his head, then paused, and she saw something shift in his expression. "Actually, that would be nice, madam. It has been a long day and I have not eaten since this morning." Natalie led him inside, suddenly aware of how dusty and disorganized everything still was. She lit lamps while Ryder waited politely near the door, hat in hand. In the kitchen, she found some basic supplies left behind and managed to put together a simple meal of eggs, bread, and coffee. They sat at the old wooden table, and she noticed how Ryder's presence seemed to fill the room, solid and reassuring. "Tell me about being a bounty hunter," Natalie said as they ate. "It sounds dangerous." "It can be," Ryder admitted, "but I am good at tracking and I am careful. I grew up in Texas, learned to track and shoot from my father. After he died, I drifted for a while, then fell into this work. It suits me, I suppose. I like being on my own, making my own decisions. You not get lonely?" The question slipped out before Natalie could stop it, and she felt herself blush. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "No, it is a fair question," Ryder said, looking at her with those striking blue eyes. Sometimes, yes, but I have never been much good at staying in one place. Always felt like I was meant to be moving, searching for something. And have you found it? Natalie asked quietly. Ryder was silent for a moment, his gaze holding hers. Not yet, he said finally, but maybe I have not been looking in the right places. The air between them suddenly felt charged, and Natalie looked away, her heart doing something strange in her chest. She barely knew this man, but there was something about him that drew her, something beyond the fact that he had recovered her stolen belongings. He had kind eyes despite the dangerous work he did, and when he spoke to her, he treated her with respect, like her thoughts mattered. They talked late into the evening, and Natalie learned that Ryder was 28, that he loved the open spaces of the territory, that he read books when he could find them, and that he had a younger sister back in Texas who wrote to him occasionally. In turn, she told him about growing up in St. Louis, about losing her parents to fever 2 years ago, about the courage it had taken to leave everything familiar and come west alone. That takes strength, Ryder said, leaning back in his chair. A lot of women would not have made that choice. I did not feel like I had much choice, Natalie admitted. There was nothing left for me there, and the idea of this place, of having something that was mine, something I could build, it called to me. You will do well here, Ryder said with conviction. I can tell you are the type who does not give up easily. When Ryder finally stood to leave, it was well past dark. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her. If you need anything, madam, any help getting this place fixed up or just advice about the town, you can find me at the hotel most evenings when I am in town. I use Muskogee as a base between jobs. I will remember that, Natalie said. And thank you again, Mr. Anderson. You did not have to go to the trouble of finding me and returning my things. Call me Ryder, please, he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. And it was no trouble at all, Miss Thorne. Natalie, she offered, if we are being informal. Natalie, he repeated, and the way he said her name made something warm unfold in her chest. Good night. She watched him walk down the street until he disappeared into the darkness, then closed the door and leaned against it, her recovered journal still clutched in her hands. She barely knew Ryder Anderson, but she already knew she wanted to see him again. Over the next 2 weeks, Natalie threw herself into fixing up the boarding house. She scrubbed every surface, painted walls, repaired broken furniture, and began testing the recipes in her aunt's journal. The neighboring women slowly began to warm to her, offering advice and occasionally help. She learned that her aunt had been well respected, that she had run a clean, decent establishment, and that several regular boarders had moved elsewhere after her death, but might be convinced to return. She saw Ryder 3 times during those 2 weeks, each encounter seeming to happen by chance, though she suspected he was finding excuses to check on her. The first time, he appeared with lumber and spent an afternoon fixing her sagging porch steps. The second time, he brought her a box of kitchen supplies, claiming he had won them in a card game and had no use for them. The third time, he simply stopped by to say hello and ended up staying for dinner again, and this time the conversation flowed even easier than before. I am heading out tomorrow, Ryder told her as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the evening settle over Muskogee. There is a man wanted for cattle rustling up near Tulsa. Should take me about a week to track him down and bring him in. Natalie felt a sharp pang of disappointment, followed by worry. Be careful, she said softly. Always am, Ryder assured her. He hesitated, then added, I will stop by when I get back if that is all right with you. I would like that, Natalie said, meeting his eyes. I would like that very much. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the connection growing between them. Ryder reached over and gently squeezed her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I will be thinking about you," he said quietly. "And I will worry about you," Natalie admitted. He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. Good to know someone will. The week he was gone felt longer than it should have. Natalie found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering if he was safe, imagining what it would be like when he returned. She opened her boarding house officially, taking in 3 boarders who had heard she was running the place like her aunt had. The income was modest but steady, and she felt a sense of accomplishment with each day that passed. When Ryder finally rode back into town 8 days later, dusty and tired but unharmed, Natalie happened to be sweeping the porch. She saw him coming down the street, and her heart leaped in her chest. He dismounted in front of her house, tied his horse and climbed the steps, and without thinking, Natalie set down her broom and walked straight into his arms. Ryder caught her, holding her close, and for a moment they just stood there, and Natalie felt like she had come home. "I missed you," she whispered against his chest. "I missed you too," Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day I was gone, I thought about coming back here to you." Natalie pulled back to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. This was more than attraction, more than friendship. This was something real and deep and terrifying in its intensity. "Ryder," she started, but he shook his head. "I know it is fast," he said. "I know we barely know each other, but Natalie, I have never felt like this before. When I am with you, I feel like I have finally found what I have been searching for." "I feel it too," Natalie admitted, her hands resting on his chest. "I was so worried about you." "I was careful," Ryder said. "I had someone to come back to." He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Natalie did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, and when his lips met hers, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I am falling in love with you," Ryder said, his forehead resting against hers. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you sitting on those porch steps, looking lost and determined all at once." "I am falling in love with you too," Natalie said, and saying the words out loud made them real, undeniable. "I do not know how this will work, with your job taking you away so often, but I do not want to lose you." "You will not lose me," Ryder promised. "I will always come back to you, and maybe in time I can find a way to stay closer to home." Over the following months, they built a relationship in the spaces between Ryder's jobs. He would ride out to track someone, and Natalie would wait, running her boarding house and building her business. Then he would return, and they would have days or sometimes weeks together, growing closer with each passing moment. He taught her to shoot, saying every woman living alone in the territory should know how to protect herself. She cooked for him, and they talked about everything under the sun, learning each other's dreams and fears and secrets. By the time autumn arrived, painting the Oklahoma landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Ryder had begun taking shorter jobs, staying closer to Muskogee. He moved out of the hotel and into a room at Natalie's boarding house, and though propriety meant they maintained separate bedrooms, everyone in town could see they were courting seriously. One evening in late October, Ryder asked Natalie to take a walk with him. They strolled through town and out toward the edge, where the prairie opened up beneath a sky filled with stars. The air was cool and crisp, and Natalie pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I have been doing some thinking," Ryder said, taking her hand as they walked. "About my work, about what I want for my future." "And what have you concluded?" Natalie asked, though her heart was already starting to race. "That I am tired of chasing outlaws across the territory," Ryder said. that I want something more stable, something that lets me wake up next to the woman I love every morning." He stopped walking and turned to face her, and in the starlight, his face was serious and tender. "Natalie Thorne, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You have made me want things I never believed I could have. A home, a family, a life that is about more than just the next bounty." Ryder reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small pearl set in the center. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "It is not much, but it is the most valuable thing I own. I would be honored if you would wear it, if you would agree to be my wife." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Ryder, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, they held each other close, and Natalie felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. "I will need to find different work," Ryder said as they walked back toward town, her hand clasped firmly in his. "Something that keeps me in Muskogee. I have some money saved from bounties, and I have been thinking about starting a freight business. The town is growing and there is need for reliable transport." "That sounds perfect," Natalie said. "And the boarding house is doing well. Together we will be fine." They married in December, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Muskogee. Natalie wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ryder wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, and when he looked at her as she walked down the aisle, the love in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The townspeople came to the wedding, curious about the bounty hunter who was giving up his wandering ways for the boarding house owner who had arrived in their town alone and robbed just 6 months earlier. They danced at the community hall afterward, and Natalie felt Ryder's arms around her and knew she had finally found where she belonged. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Ryder was gentle with her, taking his time, making sure she felt loved and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness of their room, and Natalie traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she whispered. "When those men robbed me, I thought my life was over before it had really begun. And I never imagined I would find someone worth staying in one place for," Ryder said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But here we are." "Here we are," Natalie agreed, snuggling closer to her husband. The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and building. Ryder started his freight business, buying 2 wagons and hiring a couple of reliable men to help with the work. He made runs to nearby towns, transporting goods and supplies, and he was home most nights, which was all that mattered to Natalie. The boarding house continued to thrive, and Natalie's cooking became well known in Muskogee. She took pride in creating a warm, welcoming place for travelers and permanent boarders alike. By the end of that first year, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryder one evening after dinner, unable to keep the secret any longer. His face lit up with a joy so pure and intense that it made her cry happy tears all over again. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ryder said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you so much." The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and Ryder fussed over her constantly, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, holding her hair back when she was ill. As her belly grew, He became even more protective, insisting she not lift heavy things or work too hard. She both loved and was exasperated by his concern, but she knew it came from a place of deep love. Their son was born on a hot August night in 1884, after a long and difficult labor. Natalie thought she might die from the pain, but Ryder never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, telling her she was strong and brave and that he loved her. When the baby finally arrived, wailing loudly and perfectly healthy, Natalie collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but overwhelmed with love for the tiny red-faced creature the midwife placed in her arms. "He is perfect," Ryder said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at his son. "He has your nose. And your eyes, I think," Natalie said, though it was hard to tell with a newborn. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at their son, Ryder said, "James, after my father. James Ryder Anderson." "James," Natalie repeated softly, smiling down at the baby. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." Becoming parents changed them both in ways they had not anticipated. Ryder, who had spent years being responsible only for himself, became devoted to his son, spending every free moment holding him, talking to him, watching him sleep. Natalie discovered reserves of strength and patience she had not known she possessed, learning to function on little sleep, to soothe a crying baby, to balance motherhood with running the boarding house. They had help, of course. The women of Muskogee rallied around Natalie, offering advice and assistance. One of her regular boarders, a widow named Mrs. Patterson, became like a grandmother to James, often watching him so Natalie could manage the kitchen. And Ryder adjusted his freight schedule, so he was never gone for more than a day or two at a time, always making sure Natalie had support. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, Natalie and Ryder's love deepened and matured. It was no longer just the passionate romance of their courtship, but something richer and more complex. It was partnership and friendship, shared exhaustion and shared joy, the comfort of knowing someone completely and being known in return. They had disagreements, of course, like any married couple. Ryder sometimes reverted to his independent ways, making decisions without consulting her. Natalie could be stubborn and prideful, refusing help even when she needed it. But they always worked through their conflicts, learning to communicate, to compromise, to choose each other even when it was difficult. When James was 3, Natalie became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she carried the baby with confidence born of experience. Their daughter, Sarah, was born in the spring of 1887, and she was as different from James as night from day. Where James had been colicky and difficult, Sarah was an easy baby, content to sleep and nurse and observe the world with wide, curious eyes. James was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to hold her and help care for her, and watching Ryder with both children made Natalie's heart swell with love for her husband. The freight business continued to grow, and by 1888, Ryder had 4 wagons and 6 employees. He was respected in the community, known as a fair employer and an honest businessman. The boarding house was always full, and Natalie had hired 2 young women to help with the cooking and cleaning. They were doing well financially, better than either had dared to dream when they first met. But more than the material success, it was the life they had built together that mattered. Sunday dinners with their children, sitting on the porch in the evenings watching James and Sarah play in the yard, the quiet intimacy of their nights together after the children were asleep. These were the moments that defined their happiness. One evening when James was 6 and Sarah was 3, Natalie stood on the porch watching Ryder play with the children. He was chasing them around the yard, James shrieking with laughter, Sarah Toddle running on chubby legs, and the pure joy on her husband's face made Natalie smile. "You look happy," a voice said, and Natalie turned to see Mrs. Patterson standing beside her. "I am," Natalie said simply. "I truly am." "I remember when you first arrived in Muskogee," Mrs. Patterson said. "You looked so lost and scared after being robbed like that, and look at you now. You have built something wonderful here." "I was lucky," Natalie said. "Ryder found my things, and somehow in the process we found each other." "That was not luck, dear," Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing smile. "That was fate. You two were meant to find each other." Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed, Natalie told Ryder about the conversation. They were lying in their bed, the window open to let in the cool spring breeze, and Ryder pulled her close against his side. "You believe in fate?" he asked. "I do not know," Natalie admitted, "but I know that meeting you changed everything. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if those men had not robbed me, if you had not been tracking them, if you had not bothered to return my things. I would have found you anyway," Ryder said with certainty. "Maybe not that day, but eventually. You were what I had been searching for all along. I just did not know it yet." "I love you," Natalie whispered, "more than I can ever adequately express." "I know," Ryder said, kissing the top of her head, "because I feel the same way about you." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another son, Thomas, was born in 1890, and a second daughter, Elizabeth, arrived in 1893. Their house, which they had expanded twice, was always full of noise and laughter and the chaos of 4 children. Ryder's freight business became one of the largest in the region, and Natalie's boarding house was known throughout Oklahoma Territory for its excellent food and welcoming atmosphere. But through all the growth and change, the core of their relationship remained constant. They still made time for each other, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking, still looked at each other with love and desire even after years of marriage. They had weathered difficulties together, financial setbacks and illnesses and the normal challenges of raising children, and each trial had only strengthened their bond. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Natalie to dinner at the finest restaurant in Muskogee, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson for the evening. Over candlelight and wine, he took her hand and looked at her with the same intensity he had shown the night he proposed. "10 years," he said, "and I love you more today than I did the day we married." "That is how it is supposed to work," Natalie teased gently, but her eyes were shining with emotion. "I know, but I mean it," Ryder insisted. "Every day with you is a gift. Every moment we have built together, our children, our businesses, our life, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You saved me, Natalie. Before I met you, I was just drifting, existing, but not really living. You gave me purpose and meaning. And you rescued me," Natalie said softly. "Not just by finding my stolen things, but by showing me what love could be. By being the kind of man who keeps his promises, who works hard, who cherishes his family. You are everything I needed and more than I hoped for." They kissed across the table, not caring who might see, and when they walked home through the quiet streets of Muskogee, hand in hand under the stars, Natalie thought about how far she had come. From a scared young woman standing in the road, her belongings scattered in the dust, to a successful businesswoman, wife, and mother. And it had all started because a cowboy turned bounty hunter had been in the right place at the right time, tracking criminals and recovering stolen goods. By 1895, Oklahoma Territory was changing rapidly, moving toward statehood, and Muskogee had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper city. Ryder and Natalie had become pillars of the community, respected and admired. James, now 11, was already showing signs of his father's strong character and his mother's kindness. Sarah, at 8, was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading everything she could find. Thomas at 5 was mischievous and charming, and little Elizabeth at 2 was the baby everyone doted on. One afternoon, Natalie was working in her kitchen when James came running in, out of breath and excited. "Mama, there is a lady outside who says she wants to thank you and Papa." Curious, Natalie wiped her hands and followed James outside, where she found a well-dressed woman standing near the porch with a teenage girl beside her. The woman looked vaguely familiar, but Natalie could not place her. "Mrs. Anderson," the woman said, stepping forward. "I do not know if you remember me. I am Margaret Holmes. My husband and I run the general store." "Of course," Natalie said, recognition dawning. "How nice to see you, Mrs. Holmes." "I wanted to thank you and your husband," Margaret said, her voice emotional. "My brother was one of the men who robbed you all those years ago when you first came to Muskogee." Natalie felt herself go still, shocked by this revelation. "He was captured by your husband and sent to prison," Margaret continued, "and while he was there, something changed in him. He got sober, learned a trade, became a different person. He was released last year, and he has been living a clean life ever since, working as a carpenter over in Tulsa. He asked me to find you and tell you how sorry he is for what he did, and to thank Mr. Anderson for catching him. He says going to prison saved his life." Natalie did not know what to say. She had not thought about those men in years, had almost forgotten about the robbery that had seemed so devastating at the time. "That is good to hear," she finally managed. "Please tell your brother I forgive him, and I am glad he has turned his life around." After Margaret left, Natalie stood on the porch thinking about the strange circles of life. The robbery that had felt like a disaster had led her to Ryder, to this life she loved. And Ryder's capture of the criminals had apparently saved at least one man's life. Everything was connected in ways you could never predict. She told Ryder about the visit that evening, and he was quiet for a long moment. "I never thought about what happened to those men after I brought them in," he admitted. "I just moved on to the next job. It is good to know something positive came from it." "Everything positive came from it," Natalie corrected. "Us, our children, this whole life we have built. All because you tracked down those men and returned my belongings. And found my heart in the process," Ryder added, pulling her close. "Best tracking job I ever did." As their children grew older, Natalie and Ryder began to think about the future. James had expressed interest in taking over the freight business someday, and Ryder had started training him, teaching him about wagons and routes and managing employees. Sarah wanted to be a teacher, and they were already planning to send her to the new college in Tahlequah when she was old enough. Thomas and Elizabeth were still young, their futures undetermined, but Natalie knew they would support whatever paths their children chose. One evening in the fall of 1897, Natalie found an old photograph of herself taken shortly after she had arrived in Muskogee. She looked so young and uncertain in the image, wearing a dress that was now long out of fashion, her face serious and guarded. She showed it to Ryder, who studied it thoughtfully. "You have changed," he observed. "You look happier now, more confident." "I am happier," Natalie said. "Back then, I was so afraid of everything. Afraid I would fail, afraid I would not be able to make it on my own, afraid of trusting anyone. But you taught me I did not have to be alone, that letting someone in did not make me weak." "You were never weak," Ryder said firmly. "Even then, you had more courage than you gave yourself credit for. Coming out here alone, starting over with nothing, that took real strength." "We make a good team," Natalie said, leaning against him. "The best," Ryder agreed. In 1898, tragedy struck when Mrs. Patterson, who had become like family to them, passed away peacefully in her sleep. The whole family mourned her, and at the funeral, Natalie held Ryder's hand tightly, grateful for his solid presence. Death was part of life, she knew, but it still hurt to lose someone who had been such an important part of their journey. But even in grief, there was comfort in having each other, in knowing they would face whatever life brought together. And there were still so many good things to celebrate. James turned 15 and became a confident young man, taking on more responsibility in the freight business. Sarah excelled in school, her teachers predicting great things for her future. Thomas showed an interest in building things, spending hours with hammer and nails constructing elaborate projects. And Elizabeth, at 5, was the darling of the boarding house, charming all the guests with her sweet nature. On a warm summer evening in 1900, Ryder and Natalie sat on their porch watching the sun set, much as they had done countless times over the years. The children were inside finishing their chores, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had been in those early days. "Do you ever regret giving up bounty hunting?" Natalie asked, a question that had never occurred to her to ask before. Ryder did not hesitate. "Not for a single second. That life was lonely and dangerous, and it did not have you in it. I would choose this life, this family, you, 1,000 times over." "I am glad," Natalie said softly, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Ryder promised, taking her hand. "I am yours for as long as we both live, and if there is anything beyond that, I am yours there too." They sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, watching the Oklahoma sky turn shades of orange and pink and purple. Natalie thought about the young woman she had been, standing in the road with her belongings scattered around her, thinking her life was ruined. She could never have imagined then that the robbery would lead to all this. A successful business, a loving husband, 4 wonderful children, a place in a community, a life full of purpose and meaning and love. Everything had changed because a cowboy with kind eyes and a strong sense of justice had taken the time to track down stolen goods and return them to their rightful owner. He had found her belongings, and in doing so, had found his way to her heart. And she had let him in, had taken a chance on love, and it had been the best decision of her life. By 1902, Oklahoma was on the cusp of statehood, and Muskogee had transformed from a frontier town into a thriving city. The Anderson family had grown and prospered along with it. James, now 18, had become an invaluable partner in the freight business, and Ryder had begun to step back a bit, letting his son take on more leadership. Sarah, at 15, was preparing to attend college the following year, her intelligence and drive making her parents incredibly proud. Thomas, at 12, had discovered a talent for drawing and was filling sketchbooks with detailed illustrations of buildings and landscapes. And Elizabeth, at 9, was the joy of the household, always singing and laughing, bringing lightness to even the most stressful days. The boarding house had become an institution in Muskogee, and Natalie had trained an excellent staff to help run it. She still cooked special meals and oversaw operations, but she no longer had to do everything herself. This gave her more time to spend with Ryder and their children, to enjoy the fruits of all their hard work. One autumn afternoon, Natalie received a letter from St. Louis, from an old friend she had not heard from in years. The friend wrote about visiting family in Oklahoma and wanting to stop by Muskogee to see Natalie. When the friend arrived a few weeks later, an elegant woman with graying hair and expensive clothes, she looked around the boarding house and the successful business Natalie had built with undisguised amazement. "Natalie, this is incredible," her friend said. "You have done so well for yourself." I remember how worried we all were when you left St. Louis, heading west alone. We thought you were making a terrible mistake." "I thought so too for a while," Natalie admitted with a smile. "Especially when I got robbed on my way here. But that turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me." She introduced her friend to Ryder, and the woman looked between them with understanding dawning. "The man who found your things," she said. "You wrote to me about him once years ago." "The very same," Natalie confirmed. "And he has been finding pieces of my heart I did not even know were missing ever since." Ryder, overhearing, grinned and pulled Natalie close for a quick kiss. "Smooth talker," he murmured against her hair. "I learned from the best," Natalie replied. After her friend left, continuing on her journey, Natalie thought about how different her life might have been if she had stayed in St. Louis, if she had been too afraid to take the risk of coming west. She would never have met Ryder, never had her children, never built this business or found this community. Fear might have kept her safe, but it also would have kept her from truly living. In 1903, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, and this time the whole town seemed to join in the celebration. There was a party at the community hall, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Their 4 children, ranging from 19 to 10, stood together watching their parents dance, and Natalie saw them whispering and smiling, clearly pleased to see their parents so obviously in love after so many years. "Look at our family," Ryder said as they swayed together to the music. "Look at what we have created." "I know," Natalie said, her eyes misty. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Ryder said. "You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Natalie. You worked for it, fought for it, earned it." "We did it together," Natalie corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." "And I would not have wanted to do any of it without you," Ryder replied. As they danced, Natalie caught sight of James talking with a pretty young woman she recognized as the daughter of the local doctor. She nudged Ryder and nodded in their direction. "I think our son might be courting," she whispered. Ryder followed her gaze and smiled. "She is a good girl from a good family. If James is smart, he will hold on to her." "Like father, like son," Natalie said. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and growth. James married the doctor's daughter, Emily, in 1905, and they had their first child, a son, in 1906, making Ryder and Natalie grandparents for the first time. Holding her grandson, Natalie marveled at the continuation of life, at how the love she and Ryder shared had created this new generation. Sarah graduated from college and became a teacher as she had dreamed, taking a position at the Muskogee School. Thomas went to study architecture, planning to return and help design buildings for the growing city. And Elizabeth, at 13, was showing signs of following in her mother's footsteps, already experimenting with recipes and talking about running her own restaurant someday. On a quiet evening in 1907, as Oklahoma officially became a state, Ryder and Natalie stood in their yard holding hands, listening to the church bells ring and the people of Muskogee celebrating. They were in their 40s now, with gray beginning to show in their hair, lines at the corners of their eyes. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love 25 years earlier. "We have been through so much together," Natalie said, resting her head on Ryder's shoulder. "And I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the robbery," Ryder teased gently. "Especially not the robbery," Natalie said firmly, "because it brought me you." "I was thinking," Ryder said slowly, "about what Sheriff Coleman said that day when you reported the robbery. He said not to hold your breath about getting anything back." "I remember," Natalie said, "but you got everything back and so much more," Ryder continued. "Your belongings, yes, but also a home, a family, a life. Everything you needed and everything you did not even know you wanted. Because of you, Natalie said, turning to look at him. Because you cared enough to track down criminals and return what they had stolen. Because you saw me and really saw me, not just as a victim or a woman who needed help, but as a person worth knowing. You gave me my life back and then you became part of it. We gave each other our lives, Ryder said. That is how love works, I think. Not taking, but giving, and receiving what is freely offered. They kissed as the celebration continued around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting together. The cowboy who had tracked down stolen goods and found love instead, and the woman who had been robbed of her belongings but gained everything that truly mattered. In 1910, as they approached their 27th anniversary, Ryder and Natalie took stock of their lives. The freight business was thriving under James's management, with branches now in 3 cities. The boarding house continued to be successful, and Natalie had published a cookbook featuring her aunt's recipes and her own creations. Sarah was married to a fellow teacher and expecting her first child. Thomas had returned from school and opened an architectural firm, and Elizabeth, at 17, was preparing to attend culinary school. We did well, Ryder said one evening as they reviewed their various investments and businesses. Better than I ever dreamed possible. We were blessed, Natalie agreed. With each other, with our children, with opportunities and the ability to make the most of them. But more than the financial success or the respect they had earned in the community, what mattered most was the love that still burned bright between them. After more than a quarter-century of marriage, they still sought each other out, still talked for hours, still laughed together and dreamed together and supported each other through everything life brought their way. When Sarah had her baby, a daughter, in early 1911, Natalie held her second grandchild and thought about the circle of life, about how love multiplied and spread, creating new branches on the family tree. She thought about how afraid she had been when she first arrived in Muskogee, how alone she had felt, and how different everything was now. She had family, not just her husband and children, but grandchildren and extended family created through marriage and friendship. One summer day in 1912, 30 years after their first meeting, Ryder surprised Natalie with a picnic out on the prairie, just the two of them. They rode in a buggy to a spot where wildflowers bloomed in brilliant colors, and they sat on a blanket eating the lunch Natalie had packed, watching clouds drift across the endless Oklahoma sky. "You remember our first conversation?" Ryder asked, lying back with his hands behind his head. "Of course," Natalie said. "You brought me my journal and jewelry, and I invited you to dinner to thank you. We talked about your work and about why I had come to Muskogee. You said you wanted something that was yours, something you could build," Ryder recalled, "and you did it." "You built an empire, Natalie." "We built it," Natalie corrected, as she always did. "Together." "Together," Ryder agreed, pulling her down beside him, "and I would not have it any other way." They lay side by side, watching the clouds, and Natalie felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. She had everything she had ever wanted and so much more than she had known to hope for. Love, family, success, purpose, belonging. All because she had taken a chance on coming west, and because a cowboy with a good heart had cared enough to help a stranger. "I love you," she said softly. "More than words can express." "I know," Ryder said, rolling to face her. "I feel it every day, in everything you do, in every look you give me, in the life we have built. And I love you just as much, Natalie Anderson. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed under the wide Oklahoma sky. Two people who had found each other and held on tight, who had weathered storms and celebrated joys, who had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The woman who had been robbed and the cowboy who had tracked down her belongings and, in the process, captured her heart. As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. They grew old together gracefully, watching their children raise families of their own, watching Muskogee grow into a modern city, watching the world change around them while the core of who they were to each other remained constant. In 1920, on their 37th anniversary, they threw a big party to celebrate. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends from throughout their lives. James gave a toast, thanking his parents for showing him what real love looked like, for modeling partnership and respect and devotion. Sarah spoke about her mother's strength and her father's kindness. Thomas talked about the legacy they had built together. And Elizabeth, now married with children of her own, said simply, "You two are proof that fairy tales can come true." Ryder and Natalie stood together, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, and they looked at the family they had created, the life they had built, and knew they had done well. They had taken their chance meeting and turned it into something enduring and beautiful. "You know," Natalie said later that night as they prepared for bed, "I often think about what might have happened if you had not bothered to return my things, if you had just collected your bounty and moved on." "I think I would have found you anyway," Ryder said, as he had said many times over the years. "Maybe not that day, but eventually. We were meant to find each other, Natalie. I truly believe that." "So do I," Natalie agreed, climbing into bed beside her husband. "So do I." They lived many more years together, growing old but never losing the spark that had ignited between them that first evening, when a dusty cowboy had appeared on her porch with a stolen journal in his hands. They saw their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, expanding the family even further. They saw Muskogee transform from a frontier town to a modern city, and Oklahoma grow and prosper as a state. And through it all, they remained devoted to each other, still holding hands, still stealing kisses, still looking at each other with love in their eyes. They were an inspiration to everyone who knew them, proof that love could last, that it could grow stronger with time instead of fading, that two people who committed to each other could weather anything life threw at them. When Ryder passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1935, at the age of 81, Natalie grieved deeply, but also felt a profound gratitude for the 53 years they had shared. She had been blessed beyond measure, loved beyond her wildest dreams, and she knew that the love they had shared would continue to ripple outward through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She lived another 5 years, remaining active in the community, still cooking, still telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. And when she passed away peacefully in 1940 at the age of 82, surrounded by family, her last thoughts were of Ryder, of the life they had built together, of the love that had sustained her for more than half a century. The boarding house remained in the family, run by one of her granddaughters. The freight business continued to thrive, now with trucks instead of wagons. And the story of how Natalie and Ryder had met, how a robbery had led to a love story that spanned decades, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about second chances and unexpected blessings. About a woman who had the courage to travel alone and start over, and a cowboy who had the integrity to return what was stolen and the wisdom to recognize love when he found it. It was a story about building something lasting together, about partnership and respect and devotion. It was a story about tracking down not just belongings, but the pieces of each other's hearts that fit together perfectly. And it was a story with a happy ending. The kind that proves that sometimes, when everything seems lost, when you are standing alone in the dust with your belongings scattered around you, help can appear in the form of a stranger on horseback. Someone who will not just help you recover what was taken, but will give you something far more valuable. A lifetime of love, a family, a home, and a heart that beats in rhythm with your own. Natalie and Ryder Anderson left behind a legacy not just of successful businesses and a large family, but of a love story that reminded everyone who heard it that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. That being robbed can lead to being enriched beyond measure. That tracking down stolen goods can lead to finding the greatest treasure of all. Their graves sit side by side in the Muskogee Cemetery, under a large oak tree, the headstones reading simply, Ryder Anderson, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, and Natalie Anderson, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. But those who knew them, those who heard their story, knew that the words carved in stone could never fully capture what they had meant to each other or the love they had shared. On the anniversary of their meeting each year, family members gather at those graves, bringing flowers and sharing memories. The children tell their children about the great-grandparents who showed them what love really means. They tell about the robbery that brought two souls together. They tell about the cowboy who tracked down a woman's belongings and found his heart in the process. They tell about the woman who was brave enough to start over and wise enough to let love in when it appeared. And in the telling and retelling, the story lives on, a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of integrity and kindness, and the beautiful reality that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best. That being alone does not mean staying alone. That loss can lead to finding something infinitely more valuable. The story of Natalie and Ryder Anderson, the woman who was robbed and the cowboy who gave her everything back and so much more, remains a beacon of hope and a reminder that true love is not just found in fairy tales, but in the real lives of real people who choose each other, day after day, year after year, building something beautiful and lasting together. Their love story began with a robbery on a dusty Oklahoma road in 1882, and it ended more than 50 years later with two lives well lived, a family blessed beyond measure, and a legacy that continues to inspire. It is a story of the Old West, of cowboys and frontier towns, of building lives from nothing and creating something that endures. But most of all, it is a love story, pure and simple, proving that the greatest adventures are not found in chasing outlaws across the prairie, but in opening your heart to another person and building a life together, one day at a time, with patience and passion and unwavering devotion. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Ryder and Natalie are together still, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating as one, their love eternal and unbreakable, just as it was from that first moment when a cowboy returned a stolen journal to a woman on a porch, and two souls recognized each other across all the noise and chaos of life, finding home in each other's eyes.